How do you use Visual Studio Code? Well, when you get started with Visual Studio Code, you might use it like any other text editor, where you just write the code and you don't use any advanced features. You might get syntax highlighting, where the code is colored to make it easier to read, but nothing advanced. Well, you could think of Visual Studio Code like an ice cream sundae. You know, the text editor is just the ice cream, and the toppings are the advanced features. Many people have a different set of toppings for their ice cream, so many people have a different set of features that they use in a coding editor. Out of the box, Visual Studio Code comes with support for JavaScript and TypeScript, as well as some more basic features for C++ and Python. If you want more advanced features or different languages, you can install a set of extensions that give you these features. These features might be code formatting or snippets, which are just common patterns in the language that you might want to quickly type. And they're surfaced through commands that you can access through the keyboard, menus, or buttons in the application. As you can see, Visual Studio Code is extremely customizable, and it can be as lightweight as you like or as feature-rich as you want.
Hey, that was very interesting, very cool. My name is Jay Gordon, and welcome back to AzureFunBytes, where every week we get together and what do? Well, we have a conversation about all the really cool services, the people, the products, and all the different ways that you can have an amazing Azure experience. And this is one of those conversations that I really think is going to be super interesting. The big reason why is that, you know, I got started with my development and working around code in VI. Yes, I'm not the youngest person in the world. And what I learned from that was that there were very, very little ways to kind of really make your life easier. Now, you could add shortcuts, you could have ways of kind of making modifications within VI, but it necessarily wasn't the most conducive to a long-term software development practice. It was more useful for editing files quickly, things like that. And so years later, along comes the IDE, the Integrated Development Editor, I believe is the way it's described, what it stands for. And the IDE kind of came along and helped give developers a real interesting way to have more tools, more visual cues, and eventually with something like VS Code or actually just Visual Studio, just to give your developers a better experience. And so to help me kind of understand how to best really bring all the big features, the tools of Visual Studio Code out there for you to use and to understand, I've brought in none other than Burke Holland. Hey, Burke.
What's up, man? How's it going? I got distracted.
It's okay. It's easy to get distracted nowadays. There's so many screens all over the place.
Well, I'm trying to find the show on Twitch, like where all it's heading. So I'm over on Twitch.
Yeah, it's I have at or I should say /AzureFunBytes, or you can also have we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, and of course we're on Learn TV. And Learn TV is where you can go today, and if you'd like to, you can take our poll. We've got a poll up, and I'm asking a very, very easy question that I think almost any of you can give me an answer to. Are you currently using Visual Studio Code for software development? Just let us know. It'll give us an idea of like how many dedicated VS Code users there are. But other than that, Burke, I really wanted to start talking to you. And we'll talk more about Visual Studio Code in a few minutes. First of all, thanks for being part. I really appreciate it. And if I'm right, you're out in the Tennessee area, correct?
That is correct. And thanks for having me on the show, Jay. I appreciate it. Although, as you know, we exchanged. We had a deal.
There was some tit for tat.
I would do something for you. You would do something for me. You did the thing for me, and now here I am on this great show. But you never did you? I don't think you ever invited me on before, so I feel like that was my first invitation.
I might have sent you like some Teams messages before, but nothing that we actually kind of completely followed up on. I think we've both been fairly busy in these last, like, I guess it was, I guess the last time I saw you was probably 2019 or yeah, probably 2019 on one of our
20, I
Ignite
think it was
tours.
early 2020 in March.
Yeah.
Actually, we were both in. Oh, hey, what's up? We were both in Copenhagen, I believe.
Yes.
And that actually was the end, right? Like after that, because we were supposed to go somewhere next, and they just cut it off, sent everybody home, and I haven't been anywhere since then. I've just been in this chair.
I remember we were supposed to go to Amsterdam, and there were some people who went to who were supposed to go to places all over the world, like ourselves, and the world kind of stopped, and that's just how things are.
When we were in Copenhagen, I went to a meetup, and I met a guy there, and the guy was going to take me out into Copenhagen, and like show me some cool spots as a local. And then the next day he didn't show up because it was Ignite. So I messaged him, was like, hey, where are you? And he's like, yeah, I was feeling real bad last night. I had a fever and it's gotten worse today, so I can't make it out. And this was the same time that it was coming out that like, COVID was a thing. And I was scared to death that I had contracted it there. But here's the thing. I actually did get it, but it wasn't until like 18 months later that I actually did get COVID despite being vaccinated and got properly ill. But I'm better.
Yeah, I went through like, I think 3 international airports in a week, that kind of period around then. And I was kind of like terrified, but I've been really lucky. We've got, and I started wearing a mask pretty early, and I got to say, Pumela Schmidt, like the smartest of all of us at that Copenhagen event, she's like, I'm wearing a mask. I don't care. I don't know if this is early or not. I'm just going to do it. And it was, she's probably the smartest of us when she did that. So,
I know we're off topic here, but it's interesting because when we came back from that trip and nobody really knew what was going on. And there was one night where I was in bed and I couldn't sleep, and I got up at midnight and went to the grocery store and bought like $200 worth of groceries, which is not a lot. Mm-hmm. There's 5 people in my family, but just bought a ton of groceries at midnight. I don't grocery shop hardly ever, right? When I do, it's incidental, but nobody really knew what was going to happen. And then I remember also, since we're telling COVID stories, that they were out of hand sanitizer. Remember that? Like you couldn't buy it anywhere.
Sure.
I bought hand lotion and rubbing alcohol and mix the two together, which by the way does not work. Don't do this. And called it Dadatizer, right? So I had these like big things of Dadatizer, and it smelled so bad. I mean, you put it on and immediately everybody would have to clear the house, but good times, man. Good times.
Well, in tough situations, you try to do what you can. So I really want to ask you this, Burke, because I want to get into today's subject of Visual Studio Code and dev containers. But before we get there, I always like to ask my guests this question because I think it's important to kind of understand everybody's background, because this show is just about as much people as it is the technology that we talk about. So how did you get here? Like, how'd you get to this point where you are a developer advocate?
Oh, man. So, I mean, it's a long and windy road. Oh, I'm gonna monologue. So let's go way back. Well, in college, I was an information systems major, which is like, it's like when you want to do computer science, but you don't want to take linear algebra, you do information systems instead. I'm sorry, information systems people. Look, I'm right there with you. It's okay. And then I graduated college around like 2002, I don't remember, one of those years. And if you remember, that was a bad year to be looking for a job in tech because the .com bust had happened.
Sure.
And so I got a job at a factory that it was the Jimmy Dean sausage plant where they make sausage. and I was upgrading computers from Windows 98 to Windows 2000 because that was just the only work that I could get. And I did that for a long time. And by the way, if you've ever been to a sausage plant, they have to make the sausage from something, and the sausage doesn't arrive in sausage format. It arrives in a different format, and then it gets refactored into sausage. And it arrived live. So I had to work in that environment for, over a year. And then they sent me to a different factory up in Wisconsin, which was Hillshire Farm. And I did similar stuff there, but I was writing like access databases and things like that. And then I started doing proper development, came back to Nashville and worked for some healthcare companies and was just kind of doing development. Worked at a startup that flamed out in like 10 months. We were going to build we built a music player that ran in the browser where you could purchase music from your browser. That was about 2008.
Innovators.
Yes, right around the time iTunes came along and just said, nope, we'll be taking all of that. So thanks iTunes. And then I worked for a restaurant company working on their computer systems. And I just got started speaking at conferences because I kind of figured out that like I'm an okay developer, but I'm a pretty good communicator. And then
I feel like the same thing about myself. I'm like, really? I'm an okay like systems and ops person, but I'm a better communicator, and that's why I love doing this.
Yeah, I would. So yeah, I don't know if that's true about you, but I would agree in the sense that I am a better communicator. I feel like I am a technical person, although I feel like I'm good technically. Google's not going to be hiring me to write any of their algorithms, right? Like Microsoft Research has no interest in me and never will. And that's fine. Like I know what you're good at. And so I was at a conference and was hired there by someone I met and then worked for a company called Telerik, who people might have heard of, which was a Bulgarian company, and worked there for a long time. And then it was acquired. And in the process of doing that, I worked with a lot of different companies, and one of them was Disney. And John Papa was at Disney, and John Papa eventually came to Microsoft, and then eventually called me up and asked me if I wanted to interview for a position here. And lo and behold, here I am on AzureFunBytes, eating.
Wow! And
eating
to my luck,
pork rind.
To my luck. So hey, yeah, you got yourself some snacks. I am, as we were talking about before the show, I am a vegetarian, and I appreciate though the salty goodness that goes behind eating pork rinds and adding hot sauce to it.
Can't you get like a kale, like a fried kale that's similar? You can make it like a pork rind.
I'm pretty sure that they make a quote unquote pork rind that is vegan. I haven't tried it yet. I think my wife bought them once, and I think they're just kind of like corn chips or something, which isn't all that shocking.
You sound nonplussed.
Hey, I'm used to just eating vegetables nowadays. It's just what it is. I eat a lot.
You're like a rabbit, just running around nibbling on lettuce.
Yeah, me and Peter Cottontail here. So we've got an actual, real technical subject for you all here today. I don't want you to think that this is just Jay and Burke BSing. We've got something really interesting that you came to me about. I guess it was about maybe a month and a half ago. And you were trying to ask people to try out a development container that was in Visual Studio Code. You're asking like, which is the easiest way to do this? And that was part of our tit for tat. And so I thought it would be great for you to kind of give me an introduction to how to start using development containers within Visual Studio Code. And so let's get started from the start.
Yeah, sure.
What can a developer do to become more productive with VS Code?
Well, so you want me to? Should we get right into the demos, or should we answer this question? All right, let's just do that. So if you want to throw me up, and I can't see you on StreamYard anymore, so you can tell me when you got my.
No problem. You're all good to go.
All right, so we're actually going to back this up a step further and talk about what I want to talk about is what we call here at Microsoft the inner loop. And I realize that term doesn't make any sense if you don't work here at Microsoft in DevDiv, but I'm going to explain what it is. And And what it is it's the description of what it looks like to develop an application. So normally when you would develop an app, you're starting from either scratch or maybe you have a repo on GitHub that you want to clone. So a lot of times you come to GitHub and then you click this button and then you copy this and then you open a terminal, right? And you proceed to do, whatever it is that you're going to do, which is clone. But it begs the question that it depends on what you're doing with that repo. So do you really need to clone every repo? Is that really necessary that you should have to clone a repo?
I have so many old repos all over my computer that I simply just never deleted because I cloned them, started playing with them, or did some work, and then they just remained there.
Exactly. And sometimes you do, but there's gradations of like, I just need to see the code versus like I'm, eyeballs deep in it, running it, debugging it, right? There's all sorts of steps in between that. And so one of the things that you can do in VS Code now is you can come in and say, open GitHub repository, and you can see it pre-fills this because it's just reading my clipboard. And then if I hit enter here, I can't find it. Let's try that again. Open a GitHub repository. Let's see. We can open repository from GitHub. And then I can actually search here. Here it is. And so what this is going to do is it's going to open the project here in Visual Studio Code. And it looks like I've got it cloned, but I actually do not. All right. I'm just looking at it directly on GitHub. But this is what we call in VS Code the virtual file system, which is to say that we have an API that sits on top of endpoints, and then you can implement that so that it appears as if it's a file system, which we've done for GitHub. And so I can look at these, different files, and I get syntax highlighting. But again, this is all on GitHub. And if I was to make a change here, and I apologize, I'm doing Python, but I don't know Python. So if you don't know Python, you're in good company. And then, I can save this, and then I can check it in here, right? If I was to say, adding a comment. And if I commit this, it's committed directly to the master branch, right? So if I'll just commit it. There's no push. It's just there. So if we go back to our GitHub repo and refresh, right, adding a comment. So this is particularly good for things like Markdown, right? If you're editing Markdown, I use it, Jay, quite a bit for when I'm editing the Microsoft Docs. So our Docs repo is huge. I mean, it is gigs and gigs and gigs.
It is pretty huge.
Right. And every time you go back in there to do an edit, there's 2,941 changes since the hour that you last opened it, because it's just constantly being committed to. And so it saves you from having to constantly keep your machine up to date. So that's one of the ways. But if we actually wanted to run this and make sure that this still works, then we have to do that. And if we open a terminal, you can see here, I can't.
Which is one of the things that I love about Visual Studio Code is I love that integrated terminal, especially because because it has so many different types of shells that you can use, like PowerShell, Bash, TSH, you name it. They're all there.
It's awesome. Did you know you can do this?
I normally don't do that. Wow, look at that. I'm learning something new. And the fact that you're doing this, and you're not doing it on a local file system or a local workstation, you're doing it all within GitHub in a browser. And that in itself shows you just some of the big power that comes along with it.
Yeah, I'm doing it within VS Code at the moment. So this is all in VS Code. But so you can do that. How do I put
But there is a terminal integrated into the code spaces version, which we'll talk a little bit about.
Yeah, we'll get there. I'm sort of walking us towards that cliff. Okay. So at this point, we would want to run this thing, but of course we can't because we don't have any access to these files, right? Like if I do, and what's the PowerShell? I need ls and PowerShell, right? Like none of this stuff is this. And so if we click here, we sort of give you this continue working on. And then at that point, you can say, okay, now I want to clone it, right? So now you're there. You decided that you do want to clone it. So let's just put it in dev here on my C drive. So we've cloned it, and let's go ahead and open it. Now, if you've used VS Code, you may have seen this screen. This is the new Workspace Trust screen.
Yeah, I noticed that was new.
Yeah, this is a new thing. And the reason why it exists is that there are all sorts of things in VS Code that somebody could run when you clone a project, right? So there could be extensions that you have. There could be tasks that run automatically. And we don't want you to be victimized by a project with nefarious ends or means. So I've never actually seen that, but it's a possibility, right? And in the interest of being fully secure, we now say, do you trust the authors? And there are ways that you can customize this. I think you can do manage workspace trust, and you can come down here and be like, by the way, add a folder, and you can just put like, your dev folder and say, trust everything that I put in here and don't ever ask me again. Anything I clone into that folder is safe. So you can manage the workspace trust. Okay, so now we've got this thing running locally. So what do we do now, Jay? We got to run it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the one, like I was saying, one of the great things is that there's ways to run these different pieces of code that you're building. You can do local builds. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, why you may not want to do local builds.
Right.
All through this.
So in order for this application to run, it needs Python. And there's supposed to be a README. I don't know where it is. Let's create it. README.markdown. Like running locally. It's like step one, it would be to install dependencies with, I think it's pip install or pip3 install -r requirements.txt, right? And this just installs the packages that this thing needs to run. And then you need to execute Python app.py. Okay, so let's do that. If we did pip3 install -r requirements.txt, see that. And okay, and that doesn't go well. And why doesn't it go well? Because pip3 is not recognized as the name of a commandlet. In other words, PowerShell is saying, I have no idea what pip3 even is. And furthermore, right, like if we tried to just run Python, what this is going to do is open the Windows Store and tell us that we need to install it. So like, this is the problem with projects, right? Is that your development environment, in order to get up and running, may or may not be what you need it to be. And
sure. And onboarding people into new positions at different companies, it makes sense to have some sort of standard that you want people to kind of build things in. And so expecting them to have the same compatible versions on everybody's computer across different, work types of computers, whether it's Mac, Windows, Linux, there's a lot to manage.
Agreed. And it's super frustrating to clone a repo and then open it and then try to get it. Every developer has done this. And then you're trying to run it and it's, Python app.py, and it's like, I don't know what Python is. It wasn't found. Go install it. And so now you're installing things. You're copying and pasting commands from Stack Overflow to modify your path. You're not even really sure what those things do. I've done that. Okay. If you've done that, it's okay.
Yeah, I've been there.
And so we wanted to solve this problem. And the way that you solve this problem is you've got to get a way for someone to define their entire development environment as part of their repository or as part of the project. And so this is where we get into the concept of remote containers. So there's a extension for VS Code called remote containers here. And it says open any folder or repository inside a Docker container. It's a little bit cut off. But the idea is that what if instead of developing on your local machine, you could spin up a Docker container that contained everything that you need inside of that to run your project? which in theory would mean that your project would just work anywhere that somebody had Docker with no setup at all. So how does this actually play out? Like, how do we make this do that? Well, we need a Docker definition. And unfortunately, Jay, I don't know squat about Docker. Not the first thing.
It's pretty cool, the fact that it's basically just a container API. I mean, that's the best way to put what Docker is. It's an API to access to actually, build, create all the you need for containers.
Yeah, and I've always been amazed by the technology of Docker, which doesn't seem possible. It's like it's a virtual machine, but it's not.
Yeah, it's a process. It's a process.
It looks like you're in your own computer, but you aren't. Like it's like something that shouldn't be possible, but is. So that's really cool. But if we want to Dockerize this project, we've created some tools to help you do this because we understand that you want to start from scratch. So in this case, we would say add development container configuration files here. And when we do that, it's going to inspect the project and it can see that it's Python. So it's done that for us. And then it just wants to know, well, what version do you want? And we'll take the default. And then a lot of times people use Node with Python. So it's asking us if we want to have that in the container as well. And let's say no, because we're not going to use Node. And then
I know the same can be said about using .NET. A lot of times people are using .NET with a combination Node.js.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we get this new folder that says dev container, and inside there's two files. One of them is a Docker file. And if you were to scroll through here, what you would see is that it's pulling down a base image here, and then this down here installs Node, but we're not going to do that. So this actually nothing happens here. But it's this file right here where the interesting stuff happens. So it's specifying the Docker file to use. And if we scroll down, it's making a bunch of settings changes inside of VS Code, right? So when we reopen this thing in a container, it's going to make these changes. And what this does is it just makes Python work much better, right? It's configuring VS Code for you so that you don't have to do that. And then it's going to include some VS Code extensions that's going to make your Python experience better. And then down here, we've got some other very interesting things. So one of the interesting things is we've got this post create command where we can actually install dependencies automatically. And then this line down here, we run the container as a user called VS Code because running a container as root is just generally not very secure.
That's bad news.
Yeah, it's bad news. We don't like to do that because we try to be as secure as possible. Again, as you saw with the Workspace Trust. So this user does not have the same privileges as root, although you can, change to root if you like. So now that we have this, let's run this thing in a container. To do that, we're just going to say rebuild and reopen in container. And
so this is taking your local.
I've been having some trouble with Docker lately, so we'll see how this goes. I don't know if it's Windows 11 or what, but it's been giving me a lot of lip. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit. It's gone through here, and you can see that it ran the post create command, which installed all of our requirements here, and then it says we can close the terminal. And you notice down here, it says dev container Python 3. So if we open the terminal, it looks different than my terminal, right? VS Code's the user. This is the folder that we're in. And if we do an ls, we'll see all of our files here, which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but if you're in a terminal of VS Code and you control click on a file, it will open it in the editor. Did you know
so
that?
Cool.
Nice free VS Code tip there. Okay, so in theory, now that we have this thing containerized, all we'd have to do is run Python app.py and it should work. And it does. Okay, so now it's saying our application's running on port 5000. So let's open it in the browser. And here's the application. Now, this looks like it's local to my machine, and it is, but it's in the container. And what's happening here is VS Code is forwarding this port. So it's doing all of the networking for you behind the scenes, handling all the Docker stuff so that everything looks like you're running locally. But you're not, right? You're inside of a container. And that's why we call it remote containers, because you're remotely developing inside of a container. All right. So what?
All right.
So now, oh, by the way, when you go from Windows to Linux, we have this line endings thing, and I forget how to resolve this. It's like you need a, what
is it for like extra characters that give you like the caret M command?
Yeah, it's the line endings are changed, and you can change it globally on your machine, but it's better, and we might as well do this now. But if we do VS Code, dev containers, advanced concepts, there's the docs. So, I'm trying to remember VS Code, remote containers, Git attributes.
Well, while you're looking for that, I want to remind our viewers, if you haven't already yet, take the poll. Head over. You can find it here on Learn TV, aka.ms/Learn TV. There's a great a number of links that I've actually added as well, so you can see all the docs for today's show. I think it'll help you kind of understand best what Burke's talking about if you have access to all those docs. All right, I've got you back up now.
All right, perfect. So I've added this. I just pulled this from the docs, but this file just normalizes line endings across Windows and Linux, because remember, I'm on Windows, but I'm now running inside of Linux. So we have to do those kinds of things. So let's check all this stuff in and basically say add entire development environment to GitHub, because that's what we just did.
Sure.
And then I'm going to commit it. But before I push it, I want to create a new branch here. So let's create a new branch and call it dev container. Okay. And at this point, I want to push the branch up. So another thing I want to point out is, as we go along, everything that I'm doing with GitHub, I'm actually doing from within VS Code. So I haven't touched Git from the command line at all. Not that that's bad.
Yeah.
But just to say that there's alternate ways, right? If a GUI works better for you, if you like GitHub Desktop, then VS Code has similar type stuff.
Sure. And so that leads me to a question. Is this encouraging people not to learn Git? And is that a good thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to be honest with you and say that here's what I know about Git after 15 years of development. I know how to Git clone. I know how to Git fetch. I know how to merge the upstream, and I know how to push. And I know that if the push doesn't work, I can push -F.
Yeah, and I've also always known, like, if all else fails, delete, clone again.
Yes,
I've definitely been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Blow it away and start all over again. So, I think really to each their own. I don't know what learning the minutia of Git really buys you. I actually think that it's not an abstraction that is imperative to be a developer. And I remember when GitHub sort of democratized, or that's not the word. The word is like, we sort of like standardized on Git as source control. Because prior to that, there was like Mercurial, there was SVN, there was Source Safe. Source Safe.
And then there was even like Team Foundation Server, which was like the Microsoft kind of way of checking in code.
Right, just tons of stuff. And then we standardized on Git because of GitHub. And I remember being a developer at that time and being kind of new and just being absolutely flummoxed by Git, the Git CLI, because it's just not easy to use. It's complex. And I just remember thinking, like, why are we standardizing on what's clearly the hardest way to do source control? That's what I thought. And so I think that tools, if we can make that stuff easier for people, then it makes it much less difficult to get into development. But
Gotcha.
teach their own, right? Like if you like get on the command line, hey, pop open a terminal and have at it. All right.
Absolutely. So we've got about 25 minutes. I know that this goes like lightning fast. 25 minutes left, and I'm curious. There is something called code spaces.
Yes. In fact,
I'd love to see.
Let's get there. So let me just, I want to make a pull request, and then let's take a look at that.
So you're doing your standard GitHub stuff right here within Visual Studio Code without having to go and type git, dot git or git add dot git commit, all that stuff.
Up to and including creating pull requests, right? So I'm going to create a pull request here, and I'm going to merge it to my own repo, and I'm just going to create the pull request. And so now that I've done that, it's going to open it, and let's go check it out on GitHub. So I'm just going to click here, and that'll take me to GitHub. So I did all of this, of course, without leaving VS Code, right? The whole thing. But so now we're
making
here.
Your life easier.
Right. Now we're here on GitHub, and let's say, let's imagine there's two developers here, and one developer has asked the other for a review, and that person comes in and wants to review this pull request. Okay. So the way that we used to do this was you have one of two options. You can sort of like, this is the sort of the default is like, how much did you change? Can I make a call on whether or not I can sign off on this just by looking at this screen here? Or this one here and looking at the commits. And we talked about cloning at GitHub, but one of the things you can do now is if you come to GitHub, you can just hit the dot on your keyboard.
Love
and that
it.
takes you into something called github.dev, right? And it's context aware, so it knows that you're on this pull request, and it's going to take you directly to that PR. So now we're on the PR, and we can actually see all of the changes that were made here.
You think you can make it just a smidge larger?
Yeah, let's bump it up.
I'm not the youngest man anymore. My eyes, well, I've got I had that wonderful LASIK surgery. Sometimes still got to.
I heard it wears off. I heard that wears off after like 10 years.
Well, so far so good.
When I was a younger dev, I used to, some of the older folks at the office would have their monitors at like 860 by something. I forget whatever that resolution used to be on those old CRT monitors, and it was huge. And I would just be like, how on earth? And now that's what I've got. My resolution is cranked way up because I can't see. Okay. So, we can add comments here. Like, love it. You are the best. Honestly.
Oh, thank you.
Start a review, add a comment, all the kinds of things that you would normally do on a PR. But let's say that you wanted to actually run this, when we're on this specific pull request branch here. But again, because we're in a browser editor, we can't run this because there's no compute. It's just an editor on top of GitHub. There's nothing to run, right? Nowhere to execute Python. And so we can do this continue working on here, and this will allow us to either go locally or what you were talking about, which is create a new code space, which we're going to do instead. So let's create a code space here. And what this is going to do is it's going to set up for us a container, right? Remember, we were developing with containers just a minute ago locally, and code spaces is going to do the same thing, but the container is actually hosted in Azure. Okay. And it's going to be run in Azure as well. All right. So now the project is up, and if I open the terminal, you can see that I have an actual terminal here where I can execute code. So
yeah, and it's got like a container environment right there that you don't need to necessarily concern yourself with locally. It's right there in the browser.
Exactly. And if you look, this should look familiar. Remember, we had this sort of same thing over here in our dev container. See how similar that looks? It's because it's pretty much exactly the same thing. And because we have this dev container here, we should be able to run this just by executing Python app.py. Right, so notice we didn't have to install any dependencies. We didn't have to specify Python. Like, how does it know? It knows because it uses the same configuration that remote containers does. So when you check that configuration in, not only does it work for anybody who has remote containers, it also configures their code space.
It looks like it locally sends you the actual application for local develop, or I should say local review. So you can actually get to the app on port 5000.
You can, yeah. Yeah, so it does the port forwarding, and we can look at that. And the URL is going to look a little different, right? Because we're not on localhost anymore.
Sure.
But yeah, you can see it running, and we can attach a debugger and do whatever else we need to do there. And then the other thing that we can do, is well, first of all, let's fix this. I don't like this theme.
And so just like we have in we have themes, we have extensions that are in Visual Studio Code that you could use locally, but you could also do much of the same things and all the extensions within the browser version for code spaces or GitHub.dev.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Now, not everything works, but a lot of stuff works. Also here, it's private, but if I wanted to share this with you, if you and I were working on this together, I can make it public. And now anybody can access this, right? So if you go to this URL right now, or excuse me, this one, you'll see my application running.
And I know that there's also a way to use live sharing. So if you wanted to debug, I did that recently with Jessica Dean. We were working on something. And so we used live sharing where I could just send her a link to the repository and a code space and everything. And she could actually do some text highlighting and show me what changes need to be made, right? At the same time. So probably really ideal for pair programming.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do exactly that. And I think we install live share for you automatically in a code space. Let's see here. There it is. And then we can, I can share and start a new collaboration session here. I have to sign in and do all that, but yeah, sure. we can live share directly from the browser. And then the other thing that is important to know is that you have this hosted container that's in Azure, right? But you don't have to be in a browser to use that. If you have a machine that has VS Code on it and you just wanted to connect to that code space, you can do, let's close our remote here. We have an extension for VS Code called Code Spaces. And what that allows you to do, let's wait till this thing fires up, is we should have an option. Where's Code Spaces? Code Spaces? Code Spaces. Focus on Code Spaces view. So here's all my code spaces. This is the one we just created. You can see I got a bunch of them. So let's connect. And VS Code will reload. And we're going to be connected to that code space locally. But all of the compute actually happens in the cloud, right? Recognize that terminal? It's the same terminal that we've got over here.
So you're getting that works on my computer type of same environment, no matter where you're doing it.
Right.
And if I'm right, you can at least with code spaces, if you've got a Surface tablet or an iPad, you can do everything right there. It all will load in your browser, regardless of the platform.
That's correct. Or a Chromebook is a really good use case for this, where you have an underpowered environment and you can get VS Code installed on a Chromebook, but it ain't straightforward.
Sure.
And instead, you can just go to a code space. And of course, what are Chromebooks really good at? Running a web browser.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's their primary function.
Exactly. So it sort of enables you to turn a Chromebook into as high-end a dev machine as you want. Now, the question is well, what kind of machine am I getting here? Well, if you go to github.com/settings/code spaces, you'll see there's a couple of different things you can use. So like you can specify dot files for any new code space that you spin up. If you have a dot files repo, secrets, right? So if you have environment variables and things like that, you want to be encrypted. And then I think here, can I set? I don't know. I forget how to. There is a way that you can set the size of the VM that you get, but now I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is give me a sec here. Let's go back. Let's go to repository, because the other way you can get there is like from here. So let's look at a different repo. Go to repositories. Here's one. Does this one have a code space? I don't know. Let's find out. Open with code spaces. Create a new code space. Oh yeah, I've got to figure out how you set the size of the container. At one point you could do that. Maybe we remove that option. I don't know.
Well, that leads me to a question. Is code spaces free? And if not, why is it not free?
That's a great question. It's not free at the moment. It's restricted to GitHub Enterprise and Teams and Pro accounts, I think, which I know has been a sticking point, a point of contention for folks who don't have that and still want to use code spaces. So the question is like, why can't we make code spaces free for everyone? And the answer is, as it always is at the end of the day, is that we're trying. We have to figure out how to pay for it, because compute
ain't cheap.
Right. It's not cheap. And so there's VMs running in Azure, and they're storing all of this stuff, and they're running, and we've got processors dedicated when you spin up a code space. So just know that everybody here working on code spaces agrees with you. We want it to be available, to have a free tier, and hopefully we will arrive at that point someday. We'll see, but that's definitely the sentiment here.
So there's a command line interface also for dev container, isn't there?
There is a CLI for dev container, and we actually bundle that with the dev container. And I think, hold on. Maybe we should do npm JS. Does it come from here? Dev container. I don't know if it comes from here or GitHub packages. No. Let's see here. I forget. Dev container CLI. You used to have to install it separately. Oh, do you have to install it separately?
I think you do, and I know that like it shows you can do it right out of the little tab at the top, the palette or whatever it's called.
Yeah, let's see. Dev container CLI. Yeah, install it. Needs to be added to your path. Okay. Oh, I guess that worked. I wonder if it works in code. And now we're just trying things I've never tried before.
Wow. Well, I like to keep it fresh.
Yes, you do. CLI. Install. What was the dev container CLI?
Yeah, dev container. It's the full CLI name.
Not there, but it would be available here. But we're connected to a code space, not our dev container.
Sure.
But I wonder if I installed it, is it there now? No, I don't know. Anyway, yes, we do have one. If you can figure out how to get it, listen. Full disclosure, I said at the beginning I was not the best programmer, so no one should be surprised that I can't make it work. But what you can do with that is you can run dev container build.
Sure.
And this goes to like one of the things that Jessica Dean, who you were talking about earlier, brought up to me, which I thought was very interesting, was she said, I want a base image that's like my image that's configured, sure. Right? I configured it. It has all my dot files. I've run all my scripts. I've set everything up. And then just ask me what I want to put in it. So, give me my base image, and then I'll select Go and Redis. And then boom, give me that image. And so you can actually do that today. We're working on some content to tell you how to do it. But the dev container CLI is what you would use to build that image so that it's not something that has to be built when you actually open the code space, right? It's pre-built. And I don't know if you noticed, Jay, when we opened, like I went to, I just opened a repo that had no code space,
Mm-hmm.
and it was super fast. And the
Yeah,
reason for
I
that is
noticed that.
because they're pre-built. They have already been built. Otherwise, you'd have to sit there and wait for the thing to build.
And of course, like GitHub auto detects what languages that you're building things in, so it'll make
Well, and
sure
if you
that.
don't, so the thing is, if you don't specify a dev container configuration like we did, what Codespaces
Mhm.
does is it gives you this thing called what we call the kitchen sink, and you know what's in it?
Everything.
Everything. Literally everything, like Ruby, Go, Python, .NET, Node, Dino. I mean, you name it, it's in there. And
You get a
so,
runtime, and you get a runtime, and you get a
yeah,
runtime.
exactly. It installs the internet, which is another reason why it's not that easy to make it free for everyone.
Oh
It can
yeah,
be
yeah.
quite an
There's
image.
and the maintaining of those images to make sure that you're also getting versions that are secure. So having
Yes.
patch updates and things like that all takes some sort of human work that
Yes.
people are maintaining, from whether it's at Azure or at GitHub.
Yes, that's exactly right. And we do that. Of course, here we have a whole repository of these images where we store these definitions, and we have to keep those things up to date.
So here's a question for you, because we got about like less than like 8 minutes left.
Okay.
And are you trying to replace GitHub with VS Code?
Yeah, funny you should ask that, Jay. It's almost as if I sent you that question. So no, not at all. What we're trying to do is, we talked about the inner loop earlier, and this sort of brings us full circle. The inner loop is when you're developing inside of VS Code, we call this the inner loop. In other words, you're writing code, and when you what else might you need to do? Well, you might need to check in, you might need to review a pull request, you might need to stash, you might need to merge. And we want to keep that inside of VS Code. That's called the inner loop, because when you have to leave to go outside of VS Code, then you're context switching. And you may not think about it that much, but think about it like this. Like when you're heads down coding and someone comes in to ask you a question, that's extremely disruptive to you.
Yes.
Right? Okay. It's also extremely disruptive when you have to leave where you are and go somewhere else to get the job done. And so we're not trying to replace GitHub. What we're trying to do is help make you more productive when you're in VS Code.
Sure.
Right. So if it's easier for you to stay in VS Code, we want you to be able to do that. But if it's easier for you to go to github.com, then we want you to be able to do that too, which is why we make it easy to link back out to github.com as well.
Very, very cool. Well, it sounds like it's all about delivering some value to the users by giving them all these tools that'll make them more productive. And that's ultimately what we want for our developers. Even as an ops person, I don't want to have to build environments. Like, I don't want to have to set up for my development team a whole bunch of VMs that they're eventually running things against. I want them to be able to have as much self-service as possible. And I think that that's one of the things that we really see from using these tools like Codespaces and the dev containers, is that you're empowering the developer to be able to do more by allowing them to do it themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it goes, so Microsoft's got this mission of empowering every developer on the planet to achieve more, which I know mission statements are kind of cheesy and hokey, and I get all that, but it's an important sentiment if you consider that, like, well, now all you need to develop is a browser, right? And like, we can handle the compute for you. Well, that enables a whole slew of developers who otherwise couldn't access things to be able to write code. Lots of students, lots of people on underpowered machines. There's not a lot that they can do about it, especially with the chip shortage now. Jay, I can't even get a refreshed PC here. I'm on the same computer at Microsoft for 5 years now because
I'm real lucky. I got a refresh Mac, like maybe back in February or something like that, and I really lucked out.
Yeah, there's so anyway.
Last year,
I think that it's what we're trying to do is make you more productive wherever you are. So if you're on GitHub, you can just code right there. And if you're on VS Code, you can access GitHub from right there. So
And both give you tools to build, to test, to debug, all those things that really make your life.
Right.
And it socializes that stuff so that you can have people give comments in your pull requests. They could have people share code spaces with you so you can look at code. All those things I think is just doing exactly what the Satya's mission statement is that empowering every developer to be able to do more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really unique about VS Code is that it's, at Microsoft, we make so many different things, and VS Code is sort of like this protected area where we really are trying to do the right thing for developers without any sort of bias towards Microsoft's other offerings.
Sure.
In other words, the goal is for you to be as productive as possible. That is the end goal. And when we were talking about, VS Code in the browser with github.dev there, that, I think the guy who leads that team, Eric Gamma, had said that his original mission statement was he wanted to put, a browser, an editor in the browser, but in a way that you couldn't tell that it was in the browser. In other words, it should be as good in the browser as it is locally. And I think that VS Code's done a really good job in terms of accomplishing that goal, but also in terms of setting a baseline for just going a lot of other different places now that there's so many different ways to do development.
And the fact that it's free, it's multi-platform and it's free. That I think has always been the thing for me that made VS Code stick out even more than Visual Studio. Because while Visual Studio is great, it's got so much in it. Long story short, VS Code is free, which means you're continue to democratize that access to being able to have people to code. So combining all those things together really is trying to empower people to do more by using the tools that they have. And I think that extensions are open source. You can develop extensions, you can add them into that library, have other people use them. All these things just are creating a more inclusive environment, I think, for people who want to write code.
We hope so. And for those of you who, do want to write code, if you happen to be tuned in, you're not, we're also, we've done a lot of stuff on TikTok with VS Code. We have an official there. Thank you, Jay. We have an official account there, believe it or not. And what's really cool about TikTok is there's a lot of younger folks there, students, people just learning. And so they don't know what a GitHub gist is, or they don't know what snippets are, right? Or they don't know. And we just forget that everybody learns something at some point, right? We're not all born with in-depth knowledge of stacks and queues. And so anyway, it's been really heartening to see like this next generation of developers that's coming along and that's learning and engaging with us there on TikTok. So if that's your thing, we'd love to hang out with you there and on YouTube as well. We've been publishing YouTube shorts, and we just recently went over 100,000 subscribers on our channel, which means there's a silver plaque out there somewhere. But
awesome. I will put that in the show notes. So Burke, we've got about a minute left. And so if people want to get in touch with you on the internet, where's the best place for them to go?
Oh, wow. So you can @ me on Twitter, although if you go to Twitter, you'll notice I only follow one person, and that's the VS Code account, because I'm not quite sure that social media is really what I want to do with my life. But if you @ me there, I will see it and I will respond to you. Or you can just email me direct, just email burke.holland@microsoft.com. Just email me.
Sure.
I mean, I don't have much to do. Send me an email. I'll reply.
Well, Burke, I'm glad that that time that you had today, you shared it with us. I really appreciate it. And I know I learned a lot more about VS Code and dev containers, and I hope our viewers did as well. And so let's give everybody the big wave goodbye. Thank you so much, Burke. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Take care, everybody. I'll see you next week.